Stop scrolling. What I'm about to explain didn't happen days ago. It didn't happen yesterday. It happened just hours ago. And if you don't fully grasp what just unfolded, you're about to be caught completely off guard by what comes next. Because the Supreme Court has just issued a ruling that could send shockwaves through the entire 2024 election cycle. All 9 justices, no dissents, unanimous, and the headline being blasted everywhere is this: the Trump Organization is being dissolved. But listen closely, this stopped being just a Trump story the moment the ink dried. This is about something far bigger. What happens when the highest court in the country redraws a legal boundary? And what happens when that boundary can later be turned on anyone? So before the media reduces this to a 24-hour scandal and moves on, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because buried inside the ruling, specifically the part almost no one is reading, is the section that determines, and deep inside it, page 47, there's a short passage legal analysts are already calling one of the most dangerous blocks of language this court has ever approved. Blocks of language this court has ever approved. Not because it targets Trump, but because it forges a legal weapon that can be aimed at anyone operating behind a corporate shield of power. So yes, hit that button and enable all notifications, because the next phase of this story could rewrite American politics in real time. Here's what happened earlier today. While cable news locked onto the headline, while anchors struggled to explain what dissolution actually means, while analysts debated the money, the branding, and the fallout, I did something else. I pulled the ruling itself, every single page. And the deeper I went, the clearer it became. The version the public is being fed is only the surface layer. The court didn't frame this like a narrow punishment. It was written like a template. Here's the explanation you'll hear everywhere else. The court concluded the Trump Organization engaged in repeated long-term deception. Asset values inflated to secure favorable loans, then suddenly slashed when tax obligations came due. Same properties, same buildings, entirely different numbers depending on the audience. Banks saw one set of figures, insurers saw another, tax authorities saw a third. The court's logic is blunt. This wasn't accidental, this wasn't sloppy accounting. They argued deception was baked into the operating model itself. Misrepresentation is standard practice. They went straight to the most extreme option. Contracts terminated, assets liquidated. The entity itself ended. Markets reacted instantly because when a political brand of that scale takes a hit, capital moves fast. Analysts labeled it historic. And then the coverage faded. But that's where most people miss the real story. The true significance isn't the dissolution, it's how the court justified it. Because a paragraph that doesn't just explain what happens to Trump's company, it quietly establishes a standard that can be reused. The wording doesn't limit itself to Trump, it applies to any corporate structure accused of systematic misconduct. Like a blueprint, like a warning, and timing matters, because right now multiple legal forces are moving simultaneously. One case stalls, another accelerates. One filing gets sealed, other hearing is rushed. That doesn't feel accidental, but this is where things escalate, because while Trump was publicly raging online, calling it persecution, something else was unfolding behind the scenes. Something you're not hearing about because the people involved don't want daylight on it. What I'm about to show you isn't about Trump's statements. It's about the panic spreading inside the Republican Party, and it's not the kind you expect. Publicly, they're doing what they always do, defending him, crying judicial overreach, calling it an attack on business, demanding retaliation. The MAGA wing is locking shields right on schedule. But privately, that's where the real story begins. Behind closed doors, behind cameras, behind press releases and loyalty tweets, a completely different conversation is happening. Because internally, Republicans aren't asking whether Trump was treated fairly. They're asking something far colder: how do we survive this? A source with direct access to Senate level Republican communication shared excerpts from a strategy session that took place just hours after the ruling went public. One exchange says everything. A senior strategist wrote, "This is catastrophic. We need an exit strategy by Friday or we lose the entire 2024 map." Another replied, "How do we create distance without triggering a primary revolt? Every moderate seat is now exposed." Read that again. They're not debating innocence or guilt. They're doing political math. Because for them, this isn't a legal drama, it's a survival crisis. Here's what's fueling the panic. Internal polling, never meant to be public, shows independents turning sharply. A growing majority now view Trump as both a legal liability and an electoral one, and in the states that actually decide Senate control, the numbers are even uglier. Montana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, states that flip on razor-thin margins. For incumbents there, this is nightmare fuel. Defend Trump and risk losing the general. Distance yourself and risk annihilation in a primary. There is no safe move. It's political checkmate. And now it gets more serious. According to what I'm hearing, a small number of Republican senators, names I can't confirm yet because conversations are ongoing, have begun quietly exploring something that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Not symbolic gestures, not statements. Actual behind-the-scenes coordination with Democratic leadership to shield themselves if this situation explodes. One of these meetings reportedly happened late Tuesday night. Not a handshake, not 5 minutes, a real sit-down. And it wasn't just about the ruling, it was about the entire 2024 battlefield. What happens if Trump becomes the nominee while his business empire is being dismantled in real time? What happens to Senate candidates forced to answer for him every day? And what does a public break-even look like without detonating their base? This is the kind of planning that happens when people believe a political earthquake is imminent. Quickly, if this breakdown is helping you, hit the like button. Not for engagement begging, but because the algorithm decides whether this reaches people who need to understand what's unfolding before it's too late. Now, Republican panic is one thing, but what's happening on Wall Street, that's the real tell. Because the moves happening right now suggest the biggest players in America think this story is about to grow far beyond Trump. Warren Buffett almost never weighs in on political chaos, but when he does, markets don't just listen, they reposition. And yesterday afternoon, Buffett released a 3-word statement that sent shockwaves through financial circles. 3 words, and they weren't about Trump, they were about what comes after Trump. That distinction matters. Let's look at the market reaction. The first wave made sense. Trump-linked assets cratered, Trump-adjacent real estate got dumped. Institutional money ran. That's surface-level fear. But then something strange happened. While Trump-connected names collapsed, other sectors began climbing, as if investors were bracing for a very different kind of event. Defense contractors rose. Private prison operators surged. Major legal defunct saw sudden interest. That shift tells you the real expectation. Not one company falling, but years of legal warfare, enforcement, retaliation, and institutional instability. Wall Street wasn't reacting to the death of a brand. It was preparing for a prolonged national conflict. And that's when Buffett's words landed. Rules surface, it sounds harmless, almost boring. But Buffett doesn't choose words casually. Rules doesn't just mean laws, it means the entire system, institutions. And matter most means more than profit, loyalty, politics, or any single individual. It's Buffett signaling that the system must outlive the people inside it. And here's what should grab your attention. When Buffett says something like this publicly, there's almost always a move he's already made privately. The statement isn't the action, it's the justification. So the real question isn't what he said, it's what he did beforehand. Because here's where this stops feeling like politics and starts feeling like a warning. While everyone watched the Supreme Court headline, the smartest money in America was already moving. Financial filings show Berkshire Hathaway quietly sold roughly $2.3 billion in commercial real estate last month, not after the ruling. Not after the media frenzy, before any of it broke. Buffett doesn't guess, he doesn't gamble, and he doesn't move on coincidence. He moves early because he sees risk before the rest of the world even knows it exists. So the question isn't whether he sold, it's why he sold before the blast. And more Berkshire was alone. Other major institutions made eerily similar moves. Large capital allocators trimmed exposure to Trump-adjacent real estate weeks before the ruling surfaced. The timing wasn't sloppy, it was precise, surgical. And when the largest pools of capital on earth reposition ahead of a legal political shockwave, that's not intuition, that's a signal. Which brings us to the part the media barely touches. Yes, the ruling's no unanimous, every justice signed on. That alone is rare. But the most unsettling part isn't what the court said, it's what they didn't say. Because the silence from the conservative wing may be the loudest message this court has ever sent. Think about it. When was the last time the Supreme Court unanimously ruled on anything tied to power, elections, or a former president? Almost never. They split 5-4, they split 6-3, they fight over commas. But here, perfect alignment, no concurrences, no dissents, no separate explanation. Even the justices appointed by Trump signed on without hesitation. If this were a narrow technical issue, you'd expect at least one justice to write separately, to limit scope, clarify reasoning, or draw constitutional boundaries, especially conservatives in an election year. But they didn't, just silence. And according to someone familiar with court dynamics, that silence may be intentional. When justices refuse to write separately in a politically radioactive case, it often means they don't want fingerprints. They'll sign what's necessary, but they won't provide cover. That sends a chilling message. Even conservative justices may have decided this case was too toxic to touch beyond the bare minimum. Not because of politics, but because of risk. Risk to credibility, risk to future rulings, risk to the court itself, and now the timing becomes impossible to ignore. This ruling dropped perfectly alongside key deadlines in Trump's legal calendar. The Supreme Court controls its schedule. They didn't have to release it now. They chose to. So why this week? Why this window? If prosecutors were waiting for a Supreme Court level foundation, if they needed a clear standard before escalating, then this ruling doesn't just punish a company, it clears the runway. And that's where this turns from headline into collision. Because what comes next isn't one legal fight, it's multiple tracks converging at once. Civil fallout, federal pressure, state-level exposure, all accelerating toward the same point. The next 30 days could become a legal pileup unlike anything modern politics has seen, which brings us to the most dangerous variable. What happens next may not be decided in a courtroom, it may be decided by Trump himself. Because what he does in the next 48 hours will determine whether this remains a legal crisis or mutates into something far bigger, a legitimacy crisis, a stability crisis, a constitutional stress test. And once that begins, there's no rewind. Now I'm going to do what most media won't. I'm going to map Trump's likely response based on past behavior, current signals, and behind-the-scenes messaging. Because what you're about to see isn't random. It's a pattern, a playbook. First comes denial. The ruling is fake, rigged, political revenge. We saw that immediately, post-attacking the justices, the system framing himself as the target. That's step one. Next comes institutional attack. Not the ruling, the referee. Judges become enemies. When leaders stop already attacking authority, that's not complementary. That's de-legitimization. Then comes the emotional trigger. Supporters are told this isn't about one man, it's about the country being stolen. That framing matters. It turns a legal defeat into an existential emergency. And that's when people stop thinking about courts and start thinking about action. Surges in private channel activity, encrypted coordination accelerating, momentum not necessarily intent, familiar names reappearing, figures tied to past flashpoints surfacing again, red flags for law enforcement. 3. Legal moves designed for narrative, not victory. Emergency filings meant to buy time and shape headlines, not win. That storyline becomes fuel. Here's the timeline that matters. The next 3 days, hours 0 through tomorrow morning. Expect a last-minute legal push, emergency stays, delay attempts. Even if they fail, they create the message. We tried everything. Next comes pressure on Congress. Republicans lose the ability to stay vague. Binary choice. Do you side with Supreme Court authority or Trump's defiance? No middle ground. This is where the split becomes visible and permanent. Then comes the inflection point. If Trump complies, liquidation moves forward and the system holds through years of legal warfare. If he refuses, if court orders are ignored, we enter uncharted territory. Law enforcement faces a question no democracy wants to answer. Do you enforce a Supreme Court order against a former president? And what happens when millions are told enforcement equals tyranny? That's when a legal crisis becomes a constitutional one. Drop a comment. Do you think this timing is coordinated or coincidence? Your answer says a lot about what you believe is still possible in American democracy. Because there's one final piece. This ruling isn't just about dissolving one company. Read the language carefully. The court didn't just punish an entity. It created a standard that can be applied anywhere systematic deception is built into the structure. Political machines, super PACs, dark money networks. So subscribe and turn on notifications. Because if something breaks in the next 72 hours, and something will, you'll want the full picture, not the headline version. Share this video too. People are still arguing over surface level drama while missing the earthquake underneath. And when that sealed filing finally goes public, that's when the next chapter truly begins.